And so Matthew is the co-founder and chief executive officer of Ecosandals. He founded Ecosandals in 1997 using a grant generously provided by the Samuel Huntington Foundation Fund. He is a Jefferson Award winner, which I guess Condoleezza Rice and 2 other people have won this award.
Lance Armstrong.
Really? Oh, we should.
I won it with Lance.
Yeah.
One of the 2 of us wasn't telling the truth.
We're not sure. Okay, which is a public service award given to individuals, the greatest public service by an individual 35 years or under. Pretty remarkable. Matthew is a corporate attorney by trade. He worked with Simpson, Thatcher, and Bartlett. Are you still working?
No, no.
Thank God, no. He has also worked with Teach for America. Initially, a 1-year stint in Delaware.
3 years.
3 years.
DC,
And so Matthew has a bachelor's degree from Brown University, a law degree from the University of Michigan. He is fluent in Swahili, which is really pretty cool. And I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce what you do visiting this city that starts with a K.
Korogocho. I'll talk about that today.
Yeah, great. So you do Sandals and a whole bunch of things. We invite you to kind of share with us whatever's on your heart and mind in terms of entrepreneurship.
Cool.
Really privileged to have Matthew here with us. Will you?
Cool. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for having me. I guess there are 2 things, if nothing else today. My experience with this is I can sit and do a song and dance for an hour, and if I come back in a month and say, what did I talk about, you guys will be like, I don't know, maybe you'll remember one thing. So instead of you picking the one thing, I'm going to try to pick the one thing you remember. And the one thing I want you to remember is, I'm going to divide it up into 2 things, of course. And that's what I wish I knew before I started doing entrepreneurship that I know now. Some of you might already know this. Number 1 is don't give up. Entrepreneurs don't give up. Entrepreneurs fail more than they succeed. And they're seen by the marketplace or by people as a success because they don't give up. They see a problem that most people would say, oh, well, it doesn't work. And instead they say, okay, that might take me a while to find a solution, but we got to find a solution. So that's the first thing. And the second thing has slipped my mind, and I won't comment. The second thing is that, particularly with social entrepreneurship, in business entrepreneurship, particularly here in the US and Europe and Asia and the developed world, when you think about entrepreneurship, a lot of the game is thinking of an idea, right? What is your idea? What's your new great thing? We're going to do a social network that's cooler and hipper than everybody else. We're going to do a mobile app where you take photos and make the photos beautiful. That's the idea. And once you have the idea, that's 80% of the game. My experience with social entrepreneurship is the idea is like 20% of the game. Execution is 80% of the game. Okay? It's by definition, social entrepreneurs are working in environments where there are problems, and sometimes they're intractable problems. They're problems that a lot of people have looked at and have not been able to solve. Right? So it's not that hard to look at big problems, like for example in Kenya, with which I'm most familiar, they have a big water and sanitation problem, right? It's not that difficult to look at the water and sanitation problem and say, well, you need all new pipes running in certain areas of town, right? Your water volumes need to change. The sanitation at the plant needs to change. Coming up with the idea is not hard. How are you going to execute it, right? How are you look at the bureaucracy and the bureaucratic problem. So I just wanted to lead with that. Those are the 2 things that I hope you remember from today. One is you don't give up, and the other is 80% of the game is execution. Okay? Of course, the 2 are related because a lot of the problems that I've certainly run into, challenges I've run into, and I think if you talk to many social entrepreneurs, most of the challenges they've run into are execution challenges, and challenges that in many environments would turn people away. But because of the nature of social entrepreneurs or whatever, they keep going for it. And emphasizing to you guys that I've failed more than I succeed. I make sure that stuff doesn't show up on Google, when I fail. But a lot of what happens, a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is the barriers and the limitations and how we tried to get over some of those things, some of which we succeeded in, some of which we won't. At the end, I want to talk a little bit about a problem I'm dealing with now and seeing what you can come up with to help me out. Most of the time today, I plan to talk about Ecosandals, which is a company I started with a couple of Kenyans like 13 years ago. Another thing is, for entrepreneurs, you kind of make up the day very often when you started something, because you start it and then it kind of doesn't work, and then like my co-founder passed away, and so we delayed for 6 months, and then we had to restart. So it comes, you know, and then we were a nonprofit for a while, and then we decided we really wanted to be a company, and we got investors in like 2003. So it's you know, it's hard to, but I generally say we've been running it like 12 years. It's a footwear brand that's based in a place called Korogocho, which is a shantytown neighborhood in Nairobi. So can someone hit the lights so I can do a little song and dance? Should I put this down?
Yeah. And if you hit the ABV of the road in there, it'll come up on the screen.
Oh, sweet. So, so I first went to Kenya. I'm from not far from here in Wilmington, Delaware. I went to Kenya to study abroad. I was one of these kids who always wanted to go to Africa. I wanted to help people. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I go, and for the first 2 weeks, I was staying in a beautiful house in suburban Nairobi. And the Kenya that I was exposed to was pretty different from what I'd seen in the news and the media here. Big buildings everywhere. You know, people, I don't know what that guy's, there were skateboarders there, doing stuff that I never associated with Kenya. Like 2 years ago, I was ice skating in Nairobi. So there's all this stuff there that you just don't hear about, which probably many of you have seen when you travel, you get to a place like that. And then the second weekend, I was on a train to a place called Mombasa, which is along the eastern coast of Nairobi. It's an overnight train, and it's British-style train cars. And so I shared a car with a Kenyan guy, with two Kenyan guys who I never met before. And they were asking me, oh, you've been in our country 2 weeks, what do you think of our country? And I'm like, well, it's, you know, it's pretty cool. Like, it's a lot, it's not very poor. I thought that it was really poor. They're like, oh, you don't think it's poor? I'm like, no. So they said, okay, follow me. So we walk out of the train car, and there's in Kenyan trains, British-style train cars, perhaps like Ghana. I don't know if they have trains in Ghana, but there's first class, second class, and third class on the train, and I was in second class. You know, I thought I was going cheap. I was a college student. But then I saw third class, and it was the saddest thing I'd ever seen. There were literally hundreds of people packed into a very small space. The only thing I'd seen like it was trains in like Holocaust movies. There were people totally packed in. They were going to the bathroom literally like in a corner of this train car. And so then I'm like, okay, we can go back to our car now. We go back to our car, and then the Kenyan guy is like, I want to show you where these people live in Nairobi. When you come back to Nairobi next week, I'll take you to where they live. So he took me to where they live, and I saw how most Kenyans, or most people in Nairobi live. That's actually George, the guy we work with, eating a slice of watermelon, glue sniffing, smiling. So then I ended up, through my program, I'm like, okay, I really want to work with poor communities in urban neighborhoods in Nairobi. And so they ended up hooking me up with an organization called Kenya Water for Health Organization, which is a very well-funded organization. And I go into their head office, and I was studying computer science at the time, so they needed a computer guy. So for 4 weeks, I was going to be their computer guy. I lasted 3 days because there were 15 people in the office, and about 8 of them would show up every day, and they just sat around, they read the newspaper, they smoked cigarettes, cigars. They weren't doing anything until the donors came. When the donors came, there was sort of like an alert, donors are coming in 2 days, let's sit up straight, let's get to work. And so after 3 days, I told my professor, I need to go somewhere else. Like, I'm not going to spend my 4 weeks at this place. So I ended up finding a place called the Ndugu Society, which worked with street kids, the kids who were sniffing glue on the street in Nairobi, and I went to work with them. And they did a lot of good work, but it was extraordinarily corrupt. Everyone at the organization was trying to grab as much money as they could for themselves. The social worker, who was one of the best social workers I'd seen in my life, was busy writing reports and doing research on how kids needed to eat more meat because he bought 2 butcheries right next to where the street kids lived. And so if they bought more meat, the organization would buy meat from his butchery and he could like quadruple his salary. So I spent 3 weeks there, and then the last week I went to this other organization called Provide International, which was started by 2 American guys who were like friends of mine. And their organization was, if you read their brochures, doing amazing work feeding kids. But the problem was when I got there, they actually only fed people, according to their brochures, they were feeding people twice a day. They actually were feeding people 2 or 3 times a year. When the donors came, they fed people and they took pictures. But when the donors weren't there, they were running like a taxi service, they were taking the money and doing all this other things. So I was not big at the time. It was sort of like too early for the trade not aid movement. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. But what I saw, at first, you know, you think, so many people here are just stealing, right? They're just stealing. They have an opportunity to really help people, but they're stealing. But the more I looked at it, the more I understood that what really was going on was they were approaching something in a profit-maximizing way for themselves and their family. They were trying to feed their own families. And if you gave them, and people like me were going in where we wanted to feed people, where they weren't really into it to feed people, they were into it to feed their own families. Right? So all the NGO workers who I encountered in this very poor neighborhood, they didn't want to be there as much as they wanted to make as much money as they could for themselves and their family. It's not 100% true of everyone I worked with, right? But there were enough people that were operating like that so that it destroyed a lot of the organizations I was working with. So that was the exposure I got, and then I came back here and finished college. What I wanted to do after that experience was develop a business where the people working at these NGOs who were not doing good things at the NGOs, doing things like thinking of creative ideas of how to make more money for themselves, could actually do that and do it in a way that grew the economy. And what we came up with was a sandal product called Ecosandals. I'll show you the first, one of the first pairs I bought was, have you guys seen tire sandals before?
Yeah.
Sandals made from tires. So I bought a pair of these on the street in Nairobi. They actually just, or on a street in Tanzania, actually, northern Tanzania. And they, you just walk up to the guy, you show him your foot, he measures out your foot, and he cuts a tire. And about 20 minutes, half an hour later, you have a pair of sandals that'll last you a few years. And the students I worked with were thrilled by this. They thought it was really cool. So I went to a group of people at one of these NGOs I was working with, and I said, what if instead of just like making up stuff and getting donors to give us money, what if we just like develop products that they actually want to buy and just sell them, right? So that was the idea. And for the next 4 years, that's what we tried to do with pretty marginal success. I was going back and forth. And then over time, 2 things happened. One is our styles got much better. So I'll show you what this is kind of what we're doing now. So one is our styles got much better, and another is we went online. So this is our website here. Let me.
Hi there.
I'm Joseph Meyer from Kenya.
Welcome at Ecosandals.
Welcome at Ecosandals.
I'm in charge of customer service and
You see that
international
right?
sales for
Yeah.
Ecosandals. I had never really used a computer before joining Ecosandals. It's really exciting for me to interact with.
We'll try to. Yeah, better.
Hi there.
I'm Joseph Meyer from Kenya.
Welcome at Ecosandals.
Welcome at Ecosandals.
I'm in charge of customer service and international sales for Ecosandals. I had never really used a computer before joining Ecosandals. It's really exciting for me to interact with our customers from all over the world. I'm now building an online marketing team from young adults who have never before used computers. The footwear we make at Ecosandals need to be strong enough for the harsh conditions here in Kenya. I live in the Korokocho slums and my footwear has to be extra tough in this environment. We feel that if the footwear we make can survive this place, there is nowhere in the world it can't handle. I'm Michael Kaluri and I'm Ecosandals owner.
Hi there.
I'm Joseph Meyer from Kenya.
Welcome at Ecosandals.
Welcome at Ecosandals.
I take pride in the role I play at Ecosandals. I add color, creativity, and texture to make each sandal distinct and attractive. Since our sandals are bought by people all over the world, I have added incentive to make each sandal with love and care. Speaking of love and care, I am a single mother of a beautiful 3-year-old boy named Jeff. He's my pride and joy. I try to provide him with the best things so that he can grow up to be strong and healthy. At Ecosandals, we even make children's footwear. Jeff wears Ecosandals and it's one of the quality products that will help make him what I want him to be. I'm Elfin Kwamboka. I'm an Ecosandals owner.
Okay, so what happened was we were really struggling for 4 years, and then suddenly with the internet really came on board. The internet was there, we decided to actually start using it and turn ourselves from a footwear business that ignored the internet into an internet business that was selling footwear. And over time, embracing Facebook. So for example, we teach our sandal makers, you're not just selling a pair of sandals. If you're in a neighborhood in a place like Kenya, when you're working with your customer, often you're trying to rip off your customer. You're trying to sell them what you have for as much as you possibly can, right? You're trying to sell your pair of sandals for as much as you possibly can. We're trying to teach our sandal makers, don't worry about doing that. What you want to do is develop a relationship, right? You want to have a customer relationship. So you will almost give them the sandals, right? Just try to make your cost back. But get them to friend you on Facebook, right? Engage with them on Twitter. Engage with them on LinkedIn. So you can say, hey, we're doing this, tell 5 friends. And suddenly, we've gone from a group of people who are totally isolated in every way in Nairobi to a group of people that know how to use a computer, know how to engage with mobile technology, and know how to use it to actually be included in the world community. And what we found, the University of Nairobi did a study on our project, and we really just wanted them to look at some, whether this internet technology, how we were incorporating it, whether we were using it to maximize profit and things like that, because that's how I look at it. The researchers came and they said the primary benefit for your workers of this project is not the money they're making, but the dignity that they feel, as opposed to their neighbors who weren't working for our project. They felt very isolated. These guys, if they had a problem, they were talking to people in Los Angeles and in Stockholm, some of whom they met, who'd been in Kenya, and many of whom they never met, who just got a pair of sandals and started engaging with them on a personal level. So that's sort of the concept, that's what we did. That's the good news. Now I'm going to start going into some of the barriers that we had that we encountered along the way. The biggest barrier initially, and probably still to a certain extent, and some of you may deal with this in terms of the social entrepreneur ventures that you're engaging in, some of you may not, but it's that I was from a fundamentally different background in just about every way possible from the population in which I was working. Okay? I was from a fundamentally different background in almost every way possible from the people in which I was working. And I couldn't ignore that, right? I couldn't ignore that. I had to talk to them about it. I had to engage with them on their level. So, for example, I don't pay bribes, right? But you can't do business in the environment where they work without paying bribes. You couldn't ship something out of the country without paying bribes. It's changed a little bit now. And so how do you deal with that? How do you approach that? And I don't have an answer for you, but just be sympathetic to that. And you need to meet people halfway. I had to learn at least some of their language. And I don't even mean Swahili. I mean, some of it's just the language in which they communicate in business. I needed to understand the dynamic that I needed to walk around. They took me to markets, local markets, just to see customer behavior there. So I understood how different it was from customer behavior of the customers that we wanted to reach. And they also helped me understand at the time something I didn't take that seriously, but that was that Nairobi was a serious market, potential market for our sandals. I would always say when I started this, it's a Robin Hood venture, but instead of stealing from the rich and giving to the poor, we're going to sell to the rich and give to the poor. And my understanding then was that meant selling outside of Kenya. What we found is that actually Kenya is not a poor country, it's just an unequal country. So Kenya, there were two Western style malls when I first went there 17 years ago, 20 years ago. And there are 16 that I can count now. So there's a really, if many of you happen to know this, but the middle class in much of Africa is expanding pretty dramatically, and that creates a local market for us. So the first thing is I had to learn that I was fundamentally different from them and deal with that. Related to that is understanding that this was only going to work if they ran it, right? To create an institution as an entrepreneur, you can't always be at the head of it, right? It's about what William Butler Yeats, the poet, said, lighting a fire, not filling a bucket, right? So a lot of my work was training. It was not doing things myself that I felt like I knew how to do better than anyone. It was about training them to do it. I could fire off all the emails I wanted to customers, right? But that didn't achieve what we wanted. If I could instead teach 10 of our workers to do it really well and teach someone to teach them how to do it well. So like that guy Michael, who was the first guy working on a computer, now does all our networking, okay? Rose Ivayo is another woman, does all of our computer design, okay? And she's from that neighborhood. So understanding that you're in, I think, the most effective social entrepreneurship, you'll have the population that you're trying to impact involved in leadership roles for the organization. A specific problem we encountered fairly early on, we went on CNN in 2001, and we had, up to that point, sold about $5,000 worth of sandals. We went on CNN here on a Sunday morning, and within 4 hours had sold $23,000 of sandals online, which I thought at the time was the greatest thing. Actually, I was on in San Francisco, and I was driving cross country that day, and I was like driving, and you know I didn't have a cell phone then that had email on it, so I'd go and in each town I'd stop, and I remember I got to I think it was Boise, Idaho, or somewhere in Nevada, and like my inbox was just like flooded with hundreds of emails and orders and things like that. And it was the most exciting thing. It turned out to be a complete disaster. Complete disaster. which is a common entrepreneurial thing when you know, the one thing you want is you want your idea to hit, and then when it hit, you're like, yeah, yeah, and then you're like, oh no, like what do I do? How do we make all these sandals? There were 2 thieves went into the workshop after a week with guns and took everything, so we had to start over. But ultimately, the ultimate takeaway from that was our workers 6 months later had done a lot of work. They made more money than they'd ever made any of the prior 5 years. But 6 months later, they had nothing to show for it. And they had nothing to show for it because no one taught them how to save. They all spent. They bought all sorts of new stuff. Much of, not all of which, but much of which was gone 6 months later. Either stolen or ruined or just depreciated or whatever. TVs and electronics and things like that. So what we did is me and a group of 2 Kenyan sandal makers, we started reading. We said, okay, what can we do? Is there anything we can do about this? And we found that there was something called asset-based programs for the poor, I think they're called, where there are theorists. I know Washington University in St. Louis does a lot of work on this, where the idea is that the poor anywhere in the world are, what's the difference between a poor person and a rich person? According to these researchers, they believe the primary difference is the rich have appreciating assets and the poor have depreciating assets. So if you list on a piece of paper everything you own, right? If you take someone who we call poor, almost everything they own is something that's losing value over time. Cars, TVs, furniture, things like that. Whereas wealthier people, they have homes, they have stocks, okay? And so we said, okay, let's look at it like that we transition our workers from poverty to wealth. And this is something they came up with as much as I did. By moving, not just paying them a good wage and then walking away and saying, hey, good luck. If you go to the bar and drink it away, good luck. That's your decision, right? It's their money, they can do what they want. But what if we say, okay, for every shilling, for every dollar, you put into a stock. There's a small stock exchange in Nairobi. For every dollar you use to buy a stock, we'll give you $2 more. So you can take your salary and multiply it from $100 a month to $300 a month. But you have to leave it in. You have to build a savings pot, right? Then what happens if you do that for a year, for 2 years, for 3 years? Right? Of course, if it's stocks, we found very quickly, we also had to do some training on stocks, because stocks can lose money. I've never experienced that, but I've seen some people, right? Stocks can lose money. What if you get them to, say, invest in education? So if you're going to take your money and you're going to buy some training or education for someone in your family, then we'll match your money 2 to 1. You can do whatever you want with it. It's your money, you've worked hard, but we'll give you this additional bonus. So that's one way we have gone, and they love. That's one program of all the things we've done. That's one thing that actually has worked, where they get upset when their stocks go down, but they understand the risk. Of course, there's for math people in here, there's a dynamic that if you're matching people's money 2 to 1, the stock has to go down quite a bit for them actually to lose money, right? So if you take $100 and add $200 to it, they're buying $300 worth of stock. The stock has to go down 67% for them to start losing their money. So it's actually pretty hard for them to lose. But so that's we've tried to design programs like that. And one other thing we did, well, I guess I've talked about it a bit, was using Facebook and Twitter. That we now every sandal goes out with. I think I have them all from the same woman, but they go out with cards and that say a little bit about her life. We produced ones that said a lot more.
No, that's okay.
But they those are cards that go out with the sandals, and the key line to that is the last line, which is friend me on Facebook. And marketing people, like we were talking to Urban Outfitters 2 weeks ago, and they were going crazy about that, how they believe the American consumer now would love to connect directly to the person who actually makes the thing Because there's so, there's a sense that there are 16,000 middlemen in between to connect directly. So that's what we've done. That's been extremely challenging, just because people write all sorts of things on their Facebook page. There are cultural differences. A lot of our, anyway. It's created some business challenges. Because also it's sort of, I don't want, I think all of us want some separation between our business and our personal life. And I think it's fair to say a lot of our workers want that too, and that sort of eliminates that. So we're starting to try to get them to create 2 Facebook accounts. I gave a talk a few weeks ago, and someone said, why don't you just create Facebook accounts for them? I was saying that with Facebook and stuff like that, you actually know the buyer here has some credibility, right? Knows that this is, when I buy this pair of sandals, you don't know where this goes. How do I know it's not going in Matt's pocket or whatever? So I say, listen, you can write the person directly, right? You know them, whatever. This person is saying, actually, you don't know with Facebook, right? Because anyone could sit and create a Facebook account. Anyway. So the one last thing I wanted to talk about with Ecosandals is a current problem we're facing. I didn't bring the, current problem we're facing. So production, similar to farming, production on the world market does not really make much money. So if you buy a pair of Nike sneakers for $100 or Timberland boots for $100, by definition, over half that money is going to go to the people marketing and retailing it, right? A large percent is going to go to the people, logistic people, carrying it from point A to point B. And a very small percentage of it is going to go to the worker in Thailand or China or Kenya or wherever they are making it. So how do you get around that? How does our business get around it? Because we still are going to have to pay people to market. We still are going to have to pay people to do logistics, no matter how we organize the business. Any thoughts? So what we came up with was, we're going to do. We'll manage the whole, just like, Levi Strauss manages his global enterprise from San Francisco, we're going to manage our global enterprise from Nairobi. And we're going to be the brand. And we're going to be the logistics carrier. And we're going to do everything. It works for the production and the logistics, but most of the money is in marketing and in the retailing of it. And that's the nut that we haven't been able to crack. And the reason we haven't been able to crack it is because it's psychology. It's because you can't teach someone in Korogocho who's never been outside of Nairobi how to market to some hipster kid in Berkeley, right? They just don't get it, and so you have to hire. You can't. It's very hard to do it if you're not watching TV, right? In the U.S., if you're not sort of current on what's going on, we're finding that they're even having trouble marketing to the middle and upper classes in Nairobi, because it's just such a it's a different world. It's a different language. The things they post on Facebook don't get traction at all. People don't understand it. It's like that. So that's the current thing. We're able to, and it's something unimaginable 15 years ago. If you had told me that our workers were able to connect directly to customers, I would think all of our problems would be solved, right? Because you have to remember, years ago, back when I was an adult, there was no way. They were so isolated. Now the isolation's gone, but the ability to communicate across cultural boundaries still is enough that hasn't been cracked. So, of course, if it is cracked, that might not be so good for the U.S., right, in the U.S. economy. So that's all I got on Ecosandals. You guys have any thoughts, comments, questions? Yeah, go ahead. Say your name again.
Nishan.
Uh-huh.
Do you primarily sell on the internet? Like, how do you develop How did you develop your internal market?
It's a good question. It's changed over time. When we after the CNN thing for the next like 4 or 5 years, over half of our sales were in Europe and North America, either through shops or online. And depending on the time, it varied. There were times when our online sales became very hot because of some ad strategies we had or whatever. And there were other times when we had a good, a lot of times it's happenstance, execution. We had a good salesperson or whatever who really bought into what we're doing and sold well. Like we had a relationship with Levi Strauss for a while that really helped us pick up orders. Helped us pick up online orders. Recently though, it's been, we hit our capacity of sales like a year and a half ago, but we didn't have the capital at the time or the energy to go get capital and to build up our factory. So we kind of maxed out at about 35 employees and we're just making sandals to capacity. And that was because of what was going on in Kenya. And so now we're selling about 85% of our sales our revenue are within East Africa, East Kenya, Tanzania. So, which puts me in a weird place because then it's like, well, what am I? I don't have much more to do. Well, I do actually a lot of what I do. Like last night, late last night, I was on the phone trying to hook up. I know 2 people in Nairobi who really know how to get into certain markets in Nairobi. So I was on the phone with those 2 people and with our guy that runs the workshop in Kenya. Even though they were, probably 10 miles from each other. You know, the call was going through me. So that's a guy. I'm just trying to make myself useful. So it's hard sometimes. Yeah. Say your name.
My name's Adam, and I was wondering if you have anybody focused on, I guess, the future design or where you want to take the sandal that you're making, with market research or talking to people who buy them and say what could be better, what would you like to see out of this? Might be able to help with the marketing angle, but I was just wondering if you had anything, like any feedback from customers in terms of.
That's interesting. We've worked a lot with, we haven't done much. I hate customer service, personally. And often don't tell the truth. Like if a company pisses me off enough, this is just my personal strategy, I don't necessarily advocate it, but if a company pisses me off enough by sending me emails, I'll go and do one of their surveys and just make up all sorts of stuff. Just to add noise to the data, so maybe I'm a bad apple. But and I also sort of subscribe to Steve Jobs believed very strongly in not asking customers what they want. He said it's my job to figure out what the customer wants. So what I do is we've worked with people at Pratt Institute and Fashion Institute of Technology in New York on collaborations with our sandal makers. They always, so it's not hard to get someone from not necessarily a high-end designer, but a quality designer to design sandals for us. It's harder to say, I want you to collaborate with our 3 designers in Kenya who have no formal design education, who, if you speak design language, will not understand a word you say. In fact, if you speak English, they will understand only a small fraction of what you say. That's been what we're trying to do. So we collaborate on designs, because there's also a problem talking with customers that what are we've done some of developing different lines. We try to just keep it as simple as possible by having one line twice a year, like one line for the spring, one line for the American spring, one line for the American fall, that we then sell in Europe, in North America, and in Kenya.
So the same products that go to North America are still going to Kenya.
Right. With the exception to that is there's actually, it's a growing market. We sell, initially I wanted to sell sort of cheap, lower quality sandals around the workshop, because there are all these people around our workshop who don't have shoes, and they can't afford to pay what people in high-end shops in Nairobi or online or in shops in the US are spending. So I wanted to develop a lower quality, make a $3 to $5 product that we can sell, and maybe occasionally do giveaways and things like that. But and so they've done some of that, but really what happens is sandal makers make whatever they want. A lot of these people are their friends, their neighbors, stuff like that. So that's almost like on demand. People walk in our workshop and say, I want you to do this, but I want this strap to be here and that to be there. And then I'm like, no, don't do it. It takes so much time and to design a new thing, but they do it. So
Well, I mean, could that be a source of input? Like, people are there designing sandals custom.
right.
Did people have the ability to say, hey, this is what people are asking for?
So what I'd love to do is custom, and we're working on this. So it's execution problems, custom design online that you go and you design your sandal however you want it here, and they'll make it for you. And we're actually negotiating now to go into a mall in Nairobi and do exactly what I said they did for me. Like 18 years ago in Tanzania, where I walked in, I was walking on the street and you just walk up, they measure out your foot, you pick a style, and 20 minutes later you show up in your sandals. So there's stuff like that, but most of what we're doing in terms of design is working with designers here to collaborate with our guys back in Kenya, which is challenging. Really, for me, it's a capacity building exercise. This whole thing, like actually, I probably don't let it go outside. I don't care that much about sandals. I care about capacity building. I care about building the dignity and the educations of our workers so that they have a greater awareness of the world and so that they have a skill base that they can then take and use outside our business or in life. Yeah.
Just building off that then, how do you balance being profitable, paying like a reasonable wage, and creating a profit so it's sustainable?
Good, I'm glad you asked that. I missed a whole part of it, which is that we started as a nonprofit, and then these investors were coming to me saying they wanted to invest, and I'm like, we're a nonprofit, and workers first, we're not in it to make money, and then it occurred to me that why not just make a company where the workers own it? And that's what we ended up doing. So actually, we pay workers as little as we can, like any entrepreneur, right? Like any good businessman, you want to minimize how much your labor expense, so long as you're incentivizing workers. We give them bonuses, things like that, but the purpose of that is to incentivize them to work harder. But what we also do is give them shares in the business, so they're owners. And I think that's worked. This University of Nairobi study, which was like 4 years ago, which looked at dignity and things like that, they said that there was incredible buy-in. There's a huge gap in a lot of Kenyan enterprises between management and workers, probably enterprises in general, right? Between management and workers. And I think we certainly have fights between our workers, but the good thing about occasionally they're gender fights. They're not ethnic based. Almost everything in Kenya is ethnic based. The politics, the sports, the religion, it's all based on ethnicity, to the point that some of you made it 5 years ago, there was almost a war there over ethnicity. 2 weeks ago, there were people killed over ethnicity. But that hasn't been a problem in our workshop. Most of it's just like neighborhood fights. But there is an incredible degree of buy-in, because there are a few people who've gotten fairly rich off this. Rich in local terms off this through their shares. Two ways, through owning their shares and through that matching program. That some people have a few $1,000s in the Nairobi Stock Exchange now, which is, I know a lot more about this stuff than I do, about stocks. So for me, we started, and it worked so much better when we moved away from the nonprofit model, to be honest. Just because we had models out there to just listen, and we could be very strict on people. You come in for 3 months, the first 3 months nobody gets shares. It's not like you walk in and we get you shares. You walk in, you have to prove that you make the cut, and then over time you earn shares. And there are also investors who've come in both in Kenya and outside Kenya. And there's a guy at Google who owns some shares.
Question. Yeah, I'm Sarah, and we had talked about that at a certain point last semester, just how much responsibility is on the backs of whoever's beginning to provide that work to also see that that money is actually benefiting the people, that whether it's, you're talking about this matching program, what level of responsibility did you feel, and how did that play out to start this matching program, as far as really making sure that there was some sort of counseling there for those profits that, I mean, for the wages
Yeah.
people are making, and seeing that it actually, over the long run, is benefiting. What was your decision surrounding the matching program? And
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question, because I think it's pretty patronizing. Certainly in a private sector, if I create this business and I give you a job and you work really hard for your money and I give you your money and then you go and drink alcohol or do something that my liberal sense of going to Africa to help people out, it doesn't really mesh with that. Like, but at the same time, it's your money, you know? If I, you know, the law firm I worked for told me don't go drink a beer, I go drink 10, right? So it's not my, so on one hand there's that, right? On the other hand, you do want to give people, you know, you do want to counsel them, you want to educate them so that you know, okay, you can, like, sure, you can go, you can do whatever you want with this, but you, 6 months from now, you're going to be in the same place you were before. And I'm not going to say that everyone's like adopted this matching program and is saving their money now. But it's I'm not sure what did I answer? Like it's important to, it's very important to me personally that our workers don't go like I'm working pretty hard. A lot of people are working pretty hard to make sure that they benefit. It's pretty important to me that they're not like drinking everything away. But at the same time, I've realized that there are limits to what I can tell them. We've also put safeguards in that there are certain conditions, like if Urban Outfitters buys, they, like certain workers who've been there a while probably will make the equivalent of like 2 years' salary. So if you can think of anyone who suddenly gets a windfall like that, there's a danger there of doing some, so we actually even set up certain rules that they, like if there's a windfall like that above a certain level that comes in, they're not allowed to touch it for 1 month. Just because there's like a 1 month counseling period where they just have to live their normal life. And in fact, a number of them have come and told me privately, like their goal is to keep living their normal life, even if they have this other money, because in part because they don't want their neighbors to know they have all this money. Because if their neighbors know, okay, well. So,
just from an economics kind of point of view, how do you see that playing out then in long term in the community? I mean, how does that money get about in the community to sort of help develop, I guess, the slum areas that you're working in?
Mm-hmm. It's good. It's a good question. It's a mix. Like Michael, the guy here, has taken his home and he's been building it up. Other workers have gotten the heck out. Like they commute now. They move to other, like effectively suburbs, more middle class housing. So it's difficult to define the community, but there's no doubt that when you make more money in an environment like that, it can, I'm not going to say it causes as many problems as it solves, but it definitely, there are problems there. And a lot of people don't want people to know they got, right after we were on CNN, we had a big problem that our workers, it made the local news in Nairobi, and our workers they were working very late, and they were being held up by police officers all the time. They say in Kenya. They used to have a joke, it's not as bad anymore, that there are two types of thugs in Kenya. There are thugs without uniforms and thugs with uniforms. And you never want to run into, if you run into a thug without uniform, you can run to a thug with uniform, and usually you can just pay them something and they'll help you out. But if you get your shirt ripped off by a thug with uniform, a police officer, there's nowhere to run. So there's that dynamic that we don't, which is sort of weird as a company, because when something good happens, like if we sign Urban Outfitters, I want to send out a big press release in Nairobi, and these guys don't necessarily want that. Yeah?
How do you deal with bribery and corruption in Kenya? I know bribery and corruption is a very big thing in Africa, and even governments are finding it very difficult to stem it out.
So there are two ways this has arisen. One is the public sector corruption, and the other is private sector corruption. Public sector corruption, I think, is a lot worse when you deal with public officials like civil servants, bureaucrats, paying the electricity utility or bill. It just sort of, and the way that comes about is they'll turn off our electricity. We're paying our electricity bill. They'll turn off our electricity, and they'll come and say, you know, pay us 3 times your bill right now and we'll turn it back on. Or you can go through the process to appeal your electricity being turned off and it'll take you 6 weeks. And we've done both. When you go through the formal process, it does take 6 weeks and it will get turned on. But that actually affects us not that much because we just don't have that much engagement with public sector bureaucracy. There's a huge amount of corruption there. A lot of it's in government contracting and things like that, which we don't do much of. Like we haven't, the Kenyan border is reported by Transparency International as one of the more corrupt borders in the world, one of the more corrupt border posts going through the airport. And we ship out of the airport all the time. And unless our workers have lied to me, we've never had a single problem. So I don't know if, I mean, I don't want to say it's not that bad. We've found ways to deal with it. I think often too, when we're given a choice between waiting 5 days or paying extra, like paying somebody off to get it done right away, I tell them to wait 5 days. And that means that our customer gets a delayed product or something, and we'll just apologize to the customer. But it's definitely an issue, and it's certainly a hassle. It certainly freaks out my investors a little bit here, obviously. They're like, their interest, I was hoping to get them to invest in this and then in subsequent investments in Kenya. I think a few of them are still interested, but a few investors have been spooked by that. Like, what an awful place to do business, which is sad. Yeah.
Yeah, just regarding the ease of doing business, what sort of problems, if any, did you run up against just to incorporate your business in Nairobi? Is there difficulty with making that happen? That process of just legally starting the business, making it for profit?
So we recognized when we registered Ecosandals, it was a big pain. But I just actually registered a new, things are changing there so rapidly. So I was there in January registering a new business, and that we did in 10 days, and it was cost $300-400, which is almost on par with what you get here, depending on which state you register in here. Rwanda, supposedly, they could do, Rwanda claims to, I think, register businesses in 3 hours for less than $100 or something. There's sort of like a competition now to be the coolest, hippest tech, which helps us. I mean, one thing I think that's happened is because it's a more global world, there's an extraordinary number of leaders, not just of African states, but all around the developing world, who've spent substantive time in the US and have some, I think, almost like cultural connection to the US and a belief that they want their country to look a little bit like this place. And so at least there's some leadership at the top of the country that wasn't there a generation ago that is embarrassed by the fact it takes 6 months and you have to pay off all sorts of people to register a business, so they try to change it. So yeah, we haven't had that much difficulty, but also I have learned that our workers tell me where to go and where not to go. Sometimes I can help things by being a foreigner who shows up and says, hey, do this right, or we're going to call people and make noise, and I'm going to call the embassy. And other times that's totally the wrong approach. Like I tried to do that with the electricity guys, and it turned out to be like basically my fault that we had no electricity for a week. And so sometimes, we asked you for $100 bribe. We meant a $5,000 bribe. That kind of thing. Oh, we didn't see him here, kind of thing. So you have to know where you are, where you aren't. But also, I think I can add. A lot of times, our workers see rules as corruption, which I find really interesting. When they go into a government office, like we were registering for, there was a law passed a few years ago where everybody had to get a tax ID. Every company had to get a tax ID and buy a machine and stuff like that. And we went to buy a machine, do our tax ID, and they gave us a form where there were like 12 different things we had to give them, which is sort of a standard government thing here in the US that we used to. And so okay, it's going to take me a week to do this. And they're like, see, it's corruption. Like they want us to pay them off so that we don't have to go through this process. And I'm like, no, why don't we just try filling out the form? Fill out the form, we got everything we needed. So a lot of what people call corruption is not necessarily corruption. All right, you guys want to see one more? See what I have a new business that I'm working on. It's more entrepreneurship than social, but it's sort of a cool technology thing we're doing in Nairobi. If I can, see if I can find it. It'll take me a minute.
Pulver and eraser.
We're okay.
This is a business we'll probably be launching within the next month in Nairobi. Just to give you a flavor.
Want to go online and buy products from leading global brands? At V2Mob, that is our big idea. On V2Mob, Kenyans can now buy the world's highest quality products, any product you choose from over 20 of the most popular global websites, using your phone or your credit card. We at V2Mob will deliver the products you choose to your door. It's simple. Click below to download the add-on to your browser. You may need to close and reopen your browser when instructed. You will know your download succeeded when the V2Mob button appears in the upper right corner of your browser. Then, click any of the websites below to shop. When you shop, select an item you would like to buy and add it to your cart. When you're ready to check out, press the V2Mob button in the upper right corner of your browser. You will see your items listed in Kenyan shillings and can check out and pay. Within 3 weeks of your purchase, V2Mob will call you. Hi, this is V2Mob. We would like to deliver the iPad from the Apple Store, the 2 pairs of Italian shoes from Neiman Marcus, and the wedding dresses from Macy's tomorrow. At V2Mob, you deserve to shop like everyone else in the world. Kenya, welcome to the world's best brands at the fairest prices on your desktop. Kila kitu, kila siku. Everything, every day.
Right, so that's my newest thing. That at some point we're going to merge with the Ecosandals thing. One sort of secret thing of this is using this to access the market that we want in Nairobi. That they're probably a lot more interested in the electronics and the things from the US. And so once you get them there, you can give them the sandals as an add-on, and that'll really help expand the brand. But in terms of this, there are over 40 million people in Kenya and less than 500,000 credit cards. But more money is transferred by mobile phone every day in Nairobi, or every day in Kenya, than is transferred on Western Union around the world. People go in very poor neighborhoods and they'll take milk off the shelf and transfer the money and then walk out of the store. And so what we're doing is we're incorporating the demand to get quality American and European things in Kenya. That there's often a sense when you buy things in a shop, it's like actually made in China or Dubai or something like that. And so we're combining that with the ability to transfer money by phone so that people can now make purchases on the web using their phone and buy stuff. So that's the latest. All right?
I have a couple
Sure.
questions for you. One in terms of kind of back to Ecosandals, or even
V2Mob
V2Mob.
means like cool stuff. It's
Cool
Nairobi slang.
Right, is that right?
Yeah, mob means like a lot of, I don't want to curse, lots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're on tape, no. I'm just curious, have you talk about dignity and developing relationships and kind of having the human person be that valuable thing at the center of all your business transactions. So have you seen workers that you've had in Ecosandals kind of go on to do other projects and sort of been moved into this state of empowerment? I mean, not just necessarily to buy homes or to move out, but really kind of take on this persona and it's really changed their lives as a result of this.
We had there's a restaurant that was started because we had to lay people off at some point. Shortly after the CNN thing, we had a lot of workers working full-time salaries and we just couldn't pay it. in addition to just like spikes in sales, the work is seasonal. And so we've learned how to deal with that since then. But there was a time we had to let go of like 10 workers. And we didn't want to just let people go. Because there, like, one guy we fired years before that. He ended up in jail for 10. Like, it's life or death there. Here, if not to say it's not life or death here, but if you don't have a job in that environment, you might not be able to eat. Like, it's very serious. So what we did is we developed a loan program. And we actually never got we got about 2/3 of our money back from the loan program. We took the workers, we put them through a training. And there were 4 different businesses started, 2 of which failed right away, 1 of which failed about a year and a half later. And a 4th one is a restaurant. They started by, I forget what they called them. They called them, there was some name they gave them, like fruit seeds or something. And I spent all this time with this loan application for a fruit seed. And I didn't know what a fruit seed was. So I said, okay, let's go. They wanted to buy a blender to make a fruit seed. And so it's just like a smoothie. And so they started a little smoothie bar next to a bus stop. And then they built that up into a business that's a little bit, I don't think they employ quite as many people as Ecosandals, but they're close. So there's stuff like that. But
I'm curious, it's kind of interesting, we just had Judy Wicks here, and she kind of pointed to this whole idea of business being in the community and developing relationships, and you're pointing to some of the same things. I'm wondering how do you court, you don't have to tell us your secret or anything, but how do you court investors to say, hey, we're going to do an asset-based management thing, and we're going to give them $100, or they're going to come to the table with $100, and we're going to add 200 from, most business folks would be like, wow, I'm not down for that.
that was, for that program, we got donations. But in general, about investing, look, getting investments for something like this, like for me, 80% of it has been relationships, which does not mean people I know, or it's not people I like. We've raised about $100,000 for this in total. And of that $100,000, $20,000 or less was from people that I personally knew. The rest of the money was from people that were either friends of friends or friends of friends of friends. I pitched a few people who I didn't know and didn't get anything. I think that it depends the market you're working in. I think if you're like a tech entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, you can pitch people you don't know. I think doing business in Africa, in particular in African markets. Maybe if you do social entrepreneur work like in the education sector in the US, for example, I'd imagine there's a way to pitch strangers. But it's almost always been, we've had very serious presentation, very serious metrics. Done background research on our potential investors, and had a fairly decent success rate. But a lot of it, look, when I was in New York, one of the things I did, I worked at a private equity firm for a while where we were traveling around the world investing in companies. We were deciding which companies to invest in, which companies not to invest in. And my boss would always say, at our firm, very old man, at our firm, there are 5 things we look at when we're deciding whether to invest in a company. The most important thing, number 1, is the people. The second most important thing is the people. The third most important thing is the people. The 4th most important thing is the product, and the 5th is the market. So it's people, product, market. That's all, like you do a whole presentation, this company's great, and they're in this space that it's going to make us all a bunch of money, and look, if we put in, $5 million now, we'll have $50 million in 2 years, and everyone will be happy, and we'll throw parties. And he'll be like, okay, tell me about the people, then tell me about the people, then tell me about the people, then tell me about the product, then tell me about the market. That was sort of his thing. And that's the same approach I take to Ecosandals. Who are the people? Like, who are the people that are critical to the success of our operation? Who are the people? Who are the people? Who's the, what's the product that's really our winning product? Is it a winning product? Like, great point, is there some way we can improve it? How are we improving it? We're gonna, not just looking backwards, but looking forwards. What's our product gonna look like in the market in 2 years, 4 years? And what's our market, and how's our market changing? So, yeah, I don't know. It's very difficult to get investment money from strangers. Donor money, like I got the money to start it was from strangers. The Samuel Huntington Fund you mentioned, and some of the donor money we've gotten over the years has been we got a grant from the World Bank. From a stranger. So, but a lot of it's again, it goes back to the first point I made. It's about being aggressive and being willing to get rejected. I applied out of college for 10 grants to start this thing, and I got rejected from 9 of them. And I remember saying to my mom, like, I thought if I get 10% on a test, I failed, but I got 10% and I succeeded. So business is different. That if you pitch in the morning, if you can pitch 100 people, and you can get 1 or 2 to bite, 1 or 2 fools to bite, then then you're a success. And just keep that in mind, not just in this, but sort of in whatever you do. I've found that's true in whatever I do. And you can be, to be an entrepreneur and a social entrepreneur, you don't have to run off to Kenya and start an Ecosandals. You can do it if you're a public school teacher, right? You can be a social entrepreneur. You can incorporate that. And in fact, when you look at our schools, they kind of need that, right? And you can do that, as a teacher here, as a student, whatever, be an entrepreneur, right? So you guys got to talk about your oaths, right? You wrote up your oaths? Is that what's next?
They did. They absolutely did. I'm wondering if anyone has any pressing questions for Matthew.
I will give you, why don't I pass out my card so you guys can feel free to email me.
I have a question. The eco part, where does that come from?
Oh, sorry, they're made from, every sandal is made from used tires. And like this, a lot of other, like this is nearly entirely recycled resources. The denim is recycled denim. This is actually Kenyan Army uniform. That was illegal to use for the first 2 years we were selling the sandal. there's an air base not far from our like that's the kind of thing that by doing a market study here, and by doing a market study here, and by working with American designers, we never would have designed this. We designed this because one of our sandal makers borrowed an army jacket from a friend of his at the air base, like a kilometer away, and it ripped, and the guy didn't want it back, and so we started playing with the materials. The next thing you know, it became our best-selling sandal, and we were scared that the Kenyan police was going to shoot it. But since we resolved that.
Just a question. It seems like for Ecosandal, you got a lot of this environmental factor. For the Vitumab, is that all being flown in? So is that
no, it's an anti-environmental. It's an issue. No, it's a good point. It's a good point, and it's something we're working on. We believe that over time, there are people that have told us over time we'll be able to predict customer behavior, and we'll be able to ship stuff in bulk over there to reduce the footprint, and maybe send it by ship as opposed to air. But it's an issue. Sure. Fair. Yeah.
Are you concerned more with the Vitumab than the other? But in my experiences being in Morocco and being in India, sending things to Morocco, sometimes it doesn't get there. Sometimes you don't know what happened to it and you never see it again. I mean, are those kinds of issues that you're going to be dealing with this new venture?
Hopefully not. We have insurance. We've done a lot of work on it. We have insurance. We have good relationships with importers, exporters at the airport. But not asking in a couple months. I'm hoping not. But that environmental thing is something I worry about, and we're working on. We're trying to figure out if there's a more environmental efficient way to get people stuff. What we really want to do is there's never been a successful e-commerce site in Kenya. It's seen as a tech hub for the region now. They're building a $10 billion IT city, tech city. There's a lot of investment In the tech sector, there's actually, their fastest growing sector is mobile app writing of their whole economy. And so, but there's no e-commerce, there's no, and so we just are trying to come up with a product that we think people will buy, and then we'll get an e-commerce engine generated, and then we can actually figure out what we really want to do when we grow up.
How many days are you actually in Kenya with the organization?
2 to 3 months a year. And that's like whoever, like either you have to run it yourself or you have to have a really, really good team who you trust. And I think I talked about it at that event, that it's hard. Like we've spent a lot of money and time. And that's another thing about coming into a culture when you're not part of that culture. There's a way to read resumes, to read personalities that's cultural. Like people, you know, the schools people went to, the things they studied, that you know here if someone studied chemical engineering at Carnegie Mellon, right? They're probably pretty quick. But if someone from another country comes here, there's a good chance they may not know that. And it's similar in Kenya. There are certain signals, both like what schools you went to and all sorts of things. And also ethnically to sort of break down things.
So you don't actually do any of the hiring in Kenya?
I usually do. For the senior managers, I'm involved. I kind of sit on the committee, and we're pretty rigorous. Like you got to do a computer test. I've learned, and I think I mentioned that we almost never hire someone permanently. Everyone's on like a 3-month trial. Like you got to show us you can make the cut before we sign you up. So, and that's just from experience, getting burned.
And so Ecosandals is going to keep going unless, I mean, in terms of, do you have an idea, like, I'm hoping Urban Outfitters buys us out or something like that?
Oh, in terms of the exit?
Yeah. Is there an exit strategy?
That's a tough one because, yeah, we've had a few offers. It's never been enough money, I think, to satisfy the sandal makers. Will determine that because they own the shares. But I mean, yeah, they'll determine that. My guess is if somebody comes in with an offer to buy us out, they will sell. My preference is just to keep creating jobs and things like that. And we're looking at other these jeans are custom made for me in the slums. Like I buy a lot of stuff there. I forgot to bring. I have a little toy that I gave my nephew. They make the coolest stuff. See what this is. I should give you the speech I gave 10 years ago. What this is these are the product of people who are creative in part out of desperation. Like when you have no means of survival, you just have to, like people literally going through trash heaps trying to find anything that can help them to survive. And so what they found was tires, and they found, you know, denim and Kenyan army material. And so there's a lot of other stuff along those lines to develop a full line. But and we've been saying that for years, but execution is the problem. It's so difficult just to make, you know, a 1,000 pair order, very quality, have quality control, on time, in a way that satisfies the customer. That any attempt we've had to make jeans or anything like that, it's been like, well, let's just focus on it. So.
Has there been talk on automating processes? I know it goes against employing people traditionally.
Not necessarily. I don't think, I'd love to do that. But again, it's just execution, like trying to do, like I loved it, we were trying to automate our design for a while, our design function, and it just didn't, it's hard because we're working with, we got all of our managers a high school education. We ran a school for a while, so our workers were able to go to school at night. But they're not, it's frustrating for me, they don't have the education levels to think strategically like that. And so when someone like me or somebody else comes in with strategic ideas, they're often resistant, which is a problem.
So a lack of education.
Yeah, it's definitely.
How big, I mean, obviously.
I mean, it's hard to say because there's different levels of, like, so we work with quite a few, nobody from our neighborhood works for our project and is a university graduate, but we have some people who are Kenyan university graduates from outside. But often, to be frank, maybe too frank, they frustrate me more than the other guys who don't. Because they think they know how to strategize, but they just don't. They don't understand, you know, the. I don't want to get to the negative stuff, but it can be frustrating. So strategy is a big problem. You know, we're trained here in critical thinking. Our schools train us in critical thinking, and a lot of school systems in the world don't do that. So, I know it's often criticized here that we don't get enough of it, but it's worse in other places. Yeah.
Yeah, what you're saying is very true. I mean, the way when I came to the US in 2009, and I realized that my kids, the way they learn or the way they are taught it's quite different from the way we were taught. We were taught like in a mechanical way.
Yeah, memorization,
yeah.
rote learning. Yeah.
And then you have to pass your examination. There's no like a process to get into the solution. Whereas here it's different. So if you pitch a student or a child from US to a child in let's say in Ghana, their way of doing things is quite different. And you realize that the one from the US does it in a very pragmatic way, and the one trained in Ghana.
Yeah, I think that's right. But we found that, I don't know, Kenyans, I don't know, it's hard to generalize. It's hard to generalize, because there are exceptions. Like we have women on our team and guys who are incredible problem solvers, so it's hard to generalize. But they can't, they have nothing in their life that's taught them to think business strategically, and so it's hard to expect them to do that. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you see westernization or creating this kind of consumption with this kind of new idea as an issue in Kenya or Nairobi?
Yeah, I don't think other people do, but I have at times thought that, this actually does, even if we're like worldly successful and everybody thinks we're amazing, like that we're actually doing more harm than good in two ways. One is it's a very strict workshop. People have to be on time. They have to dress a certain way. They're taught to save money. They're taught a very like structured life, some of which I learned from a law firm, and it was very clear to me when I was working in a Wall Street law firm and traveling to Kenya to like spend a few weeks in Korogocho, that the people, I don't like to make generalizations like this, but it was very clear the people I worked with in Korogocho who had a small fraction in their lifetime what the Wall Street lawyers I worked with had, were a lot happier day to day. And so it's like, why am I doing this? Right? I'm just teaching them to like join the rat race, and you got to get up in the morning, you got to be on time for work, like just from a sort of spiritual level. I don't know, and that's something I don't necessarily have an answer to, except that if you guys don't want to do this, like don't come to work. You know, I don't want to patronize and say like you should live your life this way. It's just an opportunity. You know, but I definitely feel like the workers there are being trained to live a certain Western life, and America is like the goal, to make our country look just like America. I'm like, do you know how many people are so miserable? I mean, there are a few of us who are happy. And so that's the first thing. And the other is relative to urbanization. When I first went to Kenya, it's like, oh my God, these people, it's awful. It's tragic. Like, I thought it was absolute that there's nothing worse in the world than how these people are living, and anything I could do to help them would be great. I then learned that, well, a lot of them were making a choice. Like when stuff gets really bad there, when things get violent, when there's weather stuff, drought, they often run back to their villages, to their rural areas, where you in many of those rural areas, you almost don't need money. You just live off the land. But there's been, a lot of you probably know, there's been mass urbanization in the past few generations, really, in the developing world, because they weren't able to make a living off the land, so they came running to these urban environments. So what am I doing? I'm creating a means to attract more people to an urban environment. Well, really, maybe what we should do is encourage people to go back to the village. Now, having said that, I've subsequently done some work with some think tank guys in Washington, and it's generally accepted that de-urbanization programs almost never work. that wants people in the city. They're generally in the city for good, while individuals may go or whatever. Just in terms of mass migrations, there have been a number of deurbanization programs tried, but they've never worked out well.
The reasons for that?
I think, they asked me to talk way out of turn. I think one, I'm trying to think, it was a couple, so one, I was an economic advisor in Iraq, and we had programs to try to keep farmers on the farm, to stop them from going to cities where they get involved in terrorist activities. That's what the CIA said was happening. Whether or not it was another story. But then, so we were giving away chickens and stuff like that. And I think the main reason it doesn't work is that people are moving from rural areas to urban areas because of fundamental economic things going on, like the price of agricultural crops. And so if you artificially inflate the amount of money people make or give them housing, that's just a short-term thing. So they may go running back to the village, like, I don't know, I imagine no one, there's a program called Ujamaa in Tanzania. Jules Nyerere, their president in the 1960s, once they had independence, they said, okay, we're not going to do what Kenya and Ghana and all these other countries are doing, which is sort of embrace westernization. We're going to say we're a free country now, we're not colonized anymore, and we're going to try to roll it back 100 years to before when these guys came. And part of that is we're going to all go back to the village and be farmers again. And it failed miserably. Just, I think one big reason is there was no economic demand for them to be in the village. They're going to, the people are moving to where the economic demand is, and it's just hard to reverse that, no matter what artificial programs you set.